bustling Manhattan, nestled between the skyscrapers and the ceaseless hum of city life, our tightly knit group of friends navigated the trials of young adulthood. We were a diverse mix of individuals, 3 women and 5 men, including myself, bound by years of friendship that began in college. Despite our busy lives, we made it a point to gather every Friday night at Lucy's apartment, where the cozy, art-filled space became our sanctuary from the chaos of the outside world. It was in the early fall of 2022 when Lucy, who worked in a trendy midtown cafe, introduced us to a new friend. She had met him at work, and his name was Derek. From the moment he walked through the door, Derek exuded a magnetic charm that was impossible to ignore. Tall, with a casual confidence and an easy smile, he immediately connected with each of us, as if he'd known us for years. Derek quickly became a regular part of our gatherings. He had a knack for storytelling, recounting his adventures with a captivating flair. His tales ranged from backpacking through remote villages in South America to narrow escapes from precarious situations in bustling Asian markets. His experiences seemed endless, and we hung on his every word. It wasn't long before Derek's influence on our group was palpable. He wasn't just a new addition. He was the glue that seemed to hold us together more tightly than ever. As autumn gave way to winter, Derek's presence became more significant. He was always there to lend a hand or offer advice. When Anna needed a new job after being unfairly dismissed, Derek used his connections to secure her a position at a prestigious law firm. When Emma's apartment flooded, Derek organized a cleanup crew and helped cover the costs. His generosity knew no bounds, and we couldn't help but feel indebted to him. One snowy January evening, Derek proposed an idea that would change everything. He suggested we take a weekend trip to a remote cabin in the Catskill Mountains. It was a place he visited annually, a retreat from the city's relentless pace. The thought of leaving the city, even for a few days, excited us. The promise of fresh air and nature was a welcome escape from our daily routines. Despite some initial reservations, especially from those of us who weren't particularly fond of the outdoors, we agreed. Derek's enthusiasm was infectious, and he assured us that this cabin was equipped with all the amenities we could need: hot water, electricity, and even Wi-Fi. It was glamping, not camping, he promised. We set off early one Friday morning, leaving behind the concrete jungle for the serene, snow-covered mountains. The drive was long, but the camaraderie made it enjoyable. We sang along to old songs, shared snacks, and laughed about our city exploits. By the time we reached the cabin, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the pristine landscape. The cabin was indeed charming, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pine trees. It was rustic, yet comfortable, with a roaring fireplace and cozy furnishings. We unpacked, settled in, and Derek gathered us around the fire for what he called a tradition, a prayer to respect the wilderness. As night fell, Derek began his prayer. He spoke in a language none of us recognized, his voice growing louder and more fervent with each word. The fire roared to life without anyone striking a match, casting eerie shadows on the surrounding trees. The air grew cold, unnaturally so, and the once distant sounds of nature faded into an oppressive silence. I exchanged uneasy glances with the others, our previous jovial mood evaporating. Derek's chant grew louder, more intense. The flames danced higher, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to twist and writhe with a life of their own. A sense of dread settled over us, like a heavy blanket. The first scream shattered the night. It was Anna. She was pointing at the tree line, where dark shapes moved just beyond the firelight. Derek didn't stop his chant. Instead, he seemed to revel in the chaos, his eyes reflecting the flames with a sinister gleam. Lucy grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin, her eyes wide with terror. The shapes emerged, figures in tattered clothing, their faces gaunt and hollow, like something out of a nightmare. "We need to go," I shouted, but my voice was swallowed by the wind that had picked up, howling through the campsite. The figures closed in, their movements jerky and unnatural. They were not human. Derek's voice reached a crescendo, and the ground beneath us trembled. I turned to run, pulling Lucy with me, but my feet felt heavy, as if the earth itself were trying to hold me in place. The others were already fleeing in all directions, their cries echoing through the night. I saw Aaron trip and fall, one of the creatures descending upon him with an inhuman shriek. Lucy and I made it to the car, fumbling with the keys in a panic. As we sped down the dark, narrow road, I looked back. The cabin was a distant glow, but Derek's figure stood tall, surrounded by those monstrous beings, his chant still echoing faintly in my ears. We didn't stop driving until we reached the nearest town, collapsing in a gas station parking lot, gasping for breath. We tried to call the others, but there was no signal, no response. The police didn't believe our story, chalking it up to hysteria or a prank gone wrong. But we knew what we had seen, and the memory haunted us. Weeks passed, and the remaining friends who had survived that night tried to move on. But the shadow of Derek lingered. We never saw or heard from him again, but I sometimes wake in the middle of the night, hearing that chant, feeling the ground tremble, and seeing those hollow, hungry eyes. Anna was the first to crack. She stopped coming to our weekly gatherings, isolating herself in her apartment. When I went to check on her, I found her scribbling the symbols Derek had chanted all over her walls. "They're coming for me," she whispered, eyes wide with fear. I can hear them at night, scratching at the windows. Emma, who had always been the most rational among us, started having nightmares. She described them in vivid detail, the cabin, the creatures, and Derek's face transforming into something monstrous. She couldn't sleep, and her work suffered. Her once bright and lively demeanor turned into one of exhaustion and paranoia. One night, Lucy called me in a panic. She had seen Derek, or at least someone who looked exactly like him, standing outside her apartment. When she went to confront him, he disappeared into the shadows. I rushed over, but there was no sign of him. We decided to stay together that night, barricading the door and keeping a vigilant watch. Neither of us slept. As the weeks turned into months, our group of friends disintegrated. Aaron, who had been attacked by one of the creatures, fell ill. Doctors couldn't explain his condition. He was wasting away, his skin turning ashen, his eyes sunken and hollow. He was hospitalized, but no treatment seemed to work. He kept muttering Derek's name, his voice weak and fearful. Desperation drove us to seek answers. We scoured libraries, reached out to experts in folklore and the occult, and even contacted paranormal investigators. It was one of these experts, an elderly woman named Clara, who provided a glimmer of hope. She listened to our story with a grave expression, nodding slowly, "You've encountered something ancient and malevolent," she said. "Derek isn't who he appears to be. He's a conduit for something much darker, a force that feeds on fear and despair. The cabin was a trap, a ritual to bind you to this entity." Clara gave us a ritual to perform, a way to sever the connection and banish the entity. It involved returning to the cabin, confronting Derek, and destroying the symbols that had bound us. It was a risky plan, but we had no other choice. We had to try. We gathered what remained of our courage and set off for the cabin once more. The journey was tense, each of us lost in our thoughts and fears. The once beautiful landscape now seemed foreboding, the trees closing in like skeletal hands. As we approached the cabin, a sense of dread settled over us. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence oppressive. We stepped inside, the smell of decay hitting us like a wall. The symbols Derek had chanted were etched into the walls, pulsating with a faint, eerie glow. Derek was waiting for us, his eyes cold and empty. "You're too late," he said, his voice echoing with an unnatural timbre. "The ritual is complete. You're all bound to me now." We began Clara's ritual, chanting the incantations she had given us, lighting the sacred candles, and sprinkling the protective herbs. Derek laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. The symbols on the walls began to writhe and twist, the air crackling with dark energy. The ground trembled as we continued our chant, our voices growing louder, more desperate. The figures from that night emerged once more, their hollow eyes fixed on us. They closed in, but this time we were prepared. We stood our ground, our voices unwavering. With a final, collective shout, we destroyed the central symbol, a twisted, dark sigil that seemed to anchor the ritual. There was a blinding flash of light, and a deafening roar filled the air. When the light faded, Derek and the creatures were gone. The cabin was still, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. We left the cabin in silence, the weight of what had happened settling over us. We had survived, but we were forever changed. The scars of that night, both physical and mental, would never fully heal. But we had faced the darkness and emerged victorious back in Manhattan. We tried to rebuild our lives. The bond between us, forged in fear and strengthened by our shared ordeal. We knew the darkness was still out there, but we had learned to be vigilant, to recognize the signs, and to protect each other. It started innocently enough. I moved to this small town a few months ago, looking for a fresh start. The quiet streets, the friendly faces, it all felt like a dream. Until I met Laura. Laura was everything I needed in a friend. Outgoing, warm, and she had this magnetic personality that drew people to her. She welcomed me into her circle, introduced me to everyone, and made me feel like I belonged. I was grateful, almost too grateful. It blinded me to the subtle warnings. It began with the small things. A missing pen here, a misplaced book there. I didn't think much of it. Who would? Then came the whispers. I would walk into a room, and conversation would stop abruptly. People would glance at me with that peculiar mix of pity and fear. When I asked Laura about it, she brushed it off, laughing it away. "Small town gossip, don't worry about it," she'd say with a dismissive wave. But the gossip grew louder, more insistent. I started hearing my name mentioned in hushed tones, paired with words like trouble and danger. It gnawed at me, a constant unease that I couldn't shake. One night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I received a text from an unknown number. Trust no one. I jolted awake, heart pounding. I showed Laura the message the next day. She frowned, her face darkening. Probably some prankster, she said. People here can be weird. I'll keep an eye out. Her reassurance felt hollow, but I had no reason to doubt her. Until the night of the party. Laura had invited me to a gathering at an old, abandoned house on the outskirts of town. It's tradition, she had said, eyes sparkling with excitement. Everyone goes. It's like a rite of passage. The house was everything you'd expect from a horror movie set. Creaky floors, peeling wallpaper, and a pervasive smell of damp and decay. The party was in full swing when I arrived. Music blared from a makeshift speaker, and shadows danced on the walls in the flickering candlelight. I felt out of place, the uneasy feeling growing stronger. Laura found me almost immediately, dragging me through the throng of people to a secluded corner. I want to show you something, she said, her grip on my arm tighter than necessary. We ascended a narrow staircase to the attic. As we climbed, the noise from the party below faded, replaced by an oppressive silence. The attic was pitch black, save for a single dim bulb casting eerie shadows. Laura closed the door behind us, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Laura, what is this? I asked, my voice trembling. She smiled, but it was a smile devoid of warmth. I've been watching you, she said softly. You're different from the others. Special. I backed away, bumping into an old, dusty trunk. What are you talking about? She stepped closer, her eyes gleaming with an intensity that terrified me. The town needs someone like you. Someone to take the fall. I didn't understand. Or maybe I did, but my mind refused to accept it. Take the fall for what? Before she could answer, the attic door burst open, and several townsfolk stormed in, their faces set in grim determination. They grabbed me, their grips ironclad, and dragged me towards a circle drawn on the floor. Laura watched, her expression unreadable. It's nothing personal, she said. Every few years, we need a scapegoat to keep the town safe. You were perfect. Alone, new, easy to manipulate. Panic set in. I struggled, screamed, but it was futile. They started chanting, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. The last thing I saw before the darkness claimed me was Laura's face, watching with cold detachment. When I woke up, I was back in my apartment, everything as it had been. But the town was different. People avoided my gaze. Whispers followed me everywhere. I tried to confront Laura, but she was gone, vanished, as if she never existed. The nightmares began soon after. Visions of the attic, the chanting, the cold, unfeeling faces. I was marked, tainted. No one would listen to me. The town had taken its sacrifice, and I was left to bear the burden. Now, every night, I hear the whispers, feel the shadows closing in. I don't know how long I can hold on. I trusted a friend, and it led me to this living nightmare. The worst part, I can never leave. The town won't let me. I never thought high school would be so isolating. On the surface, it seemed like everyone was always laughing, sharing secrets, and taking selfies. But beneath the surface, I felt like a ghost, drifting through the hallways. Then, I met Sarah and her crew. They were everything I thought I wanted. Popular, outgoing, and always the center of attention. At first, they welcomed me with open arms, pulling me into their circle. I felt seen for the first time. We hung out after school, shared our dreams, and spent hours texting late into the night. But as the weeks passed, I started to notice strange things. It began subtly. One afternoon, we were all sitting in Sarah's room, and she received a message from someone. Her expression shifted from joy to something darker, a smirk creeping across her face. "Let's have some fun," she said, her eyes glinting with mischief. I didn't understand at the time, but I was about to find out. The next day at school, whispers followed me like shadows. I overheard snippets of conversations, snippets that made my stomach twist. "Did you see her? What a loser." I thought they were talking about someone else until I caught Sarah's eye across the hall. The look on her face was triumphant. I confronted her later, desperate for answers. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She laughed, the sound cold and sharp. "Just a little joke. Don't take it so seriously." It felt like a punch to the gut, but I brushed it off, convincing myself I was overreacting. Then came the night of the big party. Everyone was buzzing with excitement, and I was determined to fit in. I dressed up, feeling like $1,000,000, and arrived early, only to find Sarah and her friends huddled in a corner, giggling and glancing at me. I tried to join in, but they just turned their backs, laughter spilling out like poison. I felt a wave of dread wash over me. I could hear snippets of their conversation, something about a prank they'd pulled on me. My heart raced as I realized I was the punchline. When the time came for everyone to take turns sharing their most embarrassing moments, I knew they were waiting for mine. Finally, it was my turn. As I stood up, the room fell silent, and I felt the weight of their gazes. My palms grew sweaty, and I felt sick. But instead of telling a funny story, I shared something real, something vulnerable. I spoke about my struggles to fit in, my loneliness. Silence filled the room. Then Sarah burst out laughing, the others quickly joining in. "Wow, what a loser," she called out. The laughter echoed in my ears, ringing like a death knell. I wanted to disappear. That night, I left the party early, the sting of betrayal burning in my chest. I felt so alone. My phone buzzed with notifications, and I hesitated before looking. It was a group chat. They were still laughing about me, sharing memes and mocking my vulnerability. I felt sick. I realized then that these weren't friends. They were just fake fronds, clinging to me while hiding their true selves. In the days that followed, I started to withdraw. I spent my lunches alone, hiding in the library. I found solace in books, stories where the protagonists overcame their demons. But the isolation ate at me. I was haunted by Sarah's laughter, echoing in my mind, a reminder of the betrayal. One evening, I decided to confront her one last time. I met her after school, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached, she was surrounded by her friends, their smiles chilling. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone dripping with mockery. "I just wanted to know why," I said, voice trembling. "Why did you turn on me?" The laughter faded, replaced by a heavy silence. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes, but it was gone in an instant. "Because it's fun," she replied flatly. "You're just a joke." I turned and walked away, a sense of finality settling over me. I wouldn't let their cruelty define me. As I walked home that day, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. I might be alone, but I was free from the chains of their toxic friendship. I had learned a painful lesson about the nature of high school, and I was ready to move on. Fake friends were nothing compared to the strength I found in myself. I resolved to be my own person, even if it meant standing alone. And as for Sarah and her crew, they'd remain ghosts in my past, echoes of a time I'd rather forget.